The NBA's been dealing with an escalating load management issue. And to combat their problem, they implemented a new set of rules to try and force their star players to suit up for games when healthy. However, the new set of rules is severely flawed. Why, you ask? Let's dive right in. For those who don't know, load management is referring to a trend in the NBA in which teams rest their stars for various reasons when they're healthy. The term was originally made in reference to teams that were resting their players when healthy to try to ensure that they're rested and healthy for the playoffs. However, teams have been finding more and more reasons to rest their star players. In some cases, teams who are all but guaranteed playoff spots rest their stars to reduce their risk of injury. But now, teams are even resorting to letting their stars sit out games after they've been eliminated from playoff competition in order to give their organization the best chance at earning a higher draft selection in the lottery. The issue is extremely polarizing for many reasons. First off, it's definitely bad for league revenues. When star players sit out games, fans are less likely to tune in on TV to watch those games. You know that feeling of flipping through the channels, turning on the Laker game, and seeing that both Davis and LeBron are sitting out for rest purposes? What do you do in this case? You change the channel. But unfortunately, changing the channel isn't always a viable solution. Fans often pay hundreds of dollars to watch games. They even book trips around games in order to watch their favorite player in an exciting matchup. So imagine paying hundreds of dollars and driving across the country to see Kevin Durant play, only for KD to sit out for load management purposes. Those fans would feel shafted and rightfully pissed. It's a bad look on the NBA, and they definitely don't want a reputation as a league that doesn't value its paying fans. So this offseason, the NBA has introduced a new set of rules known as the Player Participation Policy to combat the issue of load management, particularly among star players. To begin with, the league has defined star players as those who've been all-stars or made an all-NBA team in any of the previous 3 seasons. Under these new regulations, star players who are physically capable of playing will be required to participate in nationally televised games and the newly implemented in-season tournament. One key restriction is that teams will no longer be allowed to rest multiple star players in the same game, preventing situations where fans are left disappointed by the absence of key players. Additionally, teams will be prohibited from resting star players exclusively for road games, ensuring that fans in various cities have the opportunity to witness visiting star players in action. Furthermore, the policy mandates that healthy players who are being rested must remain visible on the team bench, clearly indicating their availability to play, although strategically rested. A significant aspect of the new rules is the prohibition of season-long shutdowns of star players for reasons that could compromise the integrity of the game. To enforce compliance, teams violating these regulations will face financial penalties, with fines escalating for repeated offenses, starting at $100,000 for the first violation and increasing significantly for subsequent infractions. In theory, this new set of rules should be a step in the right direction. But the truth is that it's going to only exacerbate the issue at hand. And that's because the reasoning behind load management runs a whole lot deeper than player laziness. To look into the history of load management, it's critical to look at the case study of Kawhi Leonard, since he in many ways is the poster boy of the entire movement. When Kawhi was on the Spurs, he was quickly making a name for himself as one of the truly elite superstars that the game had to offer. He had already won an NBA title and was expected to become the future leader of the organization once Tim Duncan retired, but things didn't quite go according to plan for the Spurs. In 2018, Kawhi wanted to sit out for the majority of the season because of a lower body injury, but the Spurs medical staff had a conflicting diagnosis. They believed he was medically fit to play. The Spurs put plenty of pressure on him to abide by the ruling of their medical staff and suit up. But Kawhi took a lot of pride in knowing his own body best and believed that he was more of an expert on his own body and what it needed than the Spurs, who had their own interests in mind. See, when you're an NBA star reaching the pinnacle of your career like Kawhi was, stakes are incredibly high. Injuries can completely derail a promising career. Teams move on while the players deal with the consequences. Kawhi was in a position in which he was trying to set himself up for a massive contract following the 2018-19 season, and the last thing he needed was an injury to compromise his negotiations. On top of that, he was set to make a ridiculous amount of money in endorsement deals. He wasn't about to let the Spurs, an organization that prides itself in honoring the logo on the front as opposed to the number on the back, dictate his health. Instead, Kawhi demanded a trade, and in swooped the Toronto Raptors, an organization that was on the cusp of an NBA title, but was only one Kawhi Leonard away. Kawhi only had 1 year remaining on his contract, and the Raptors did everything in their power to appease him and persuade him to stay long-term. So they catered to his demands and made a point of allowing Leonard to dictate his own playing schedule. Leonard suited up for 60 games and rested 22 games for load management purposes. And guess what? Kawhi Leonard was perfectly healthy come playoff time and led the Raptors to their first ever NBA championship. In contrast, the Golden State Warriors, who were playing in their 5th straight NBA Finals, broke down before the finish line due to injury. Both Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson suffered major injuries in the finals that required surgery and a calendar year to rehab. The Raptors' success with Kawhi Leonard, simultaneous with the Warriors' demise, created a new narrative that players, much like cars, perform better if you mitigate the mileage on their barometer. Ever since, teams have followed the Raptors' strategy and try to keep their star players rested so they can perform in the high-stakes games. Many pointed to the science of the benefits of load management, even though there was very little scientific research existing that points to the merits of load management. Now the league's making public that there's very little science that actually backs the load management validity. Instead, Kawhi Leonard's case study with the Raptors may have been a one-off situation that shouldn't change the way teams manage their players. In fact, if anything, Leonard's performance with the Clippers after he left the Raptors contradicts the merits that load management is conducive to team success. The Clippers in 2019 offered Kawhi Leonard and Paul George contracts with the plan to follow the Raptors and allow the two stars to dictate their own availability. However, things haven't worked out as well for the Clippers as they had hoped. Since their stars have been resting when healthy, the team at times has lacked the chemistry that some opponents who don't rest their players display come playoff time. Historically, teams would very rarely rest players when healthy, and very little science exists to prove that players in previous decades were more injury-prone than they are now. With that being said, as mentioned in cases like Kawhi Leonard's when stakes are extremely high, it's clear that players are going to give some serious pushback. Physical health is only one reason for rest, though. Many other reasons, including mental health, are cited as reasons why players sit out when physically healthy. And in the past, mental health was never mentioned or even considered when discussing player safety. For these reasons, during the player empowerment era, it's going to be extremely difficult to actually force players who want to take time off to sit. It could even be detrimental to the NBA's public image. What we're likely to see is players continue to call the shots and teams cater to them in order to try and keep them satisfied. For example, instead of resting players for full games, what if players log a quick 1-minute shift? Is that within the rule book? Will the league continue to tighten the rules in order to keep the players on the floor? This seems like a poor strategy that will cause conflict. Instead, the NBA should collaborate with their star players and make a rule that benefits both sides. One possibility that's been discussed is shortening the NBA season. 82 games might be excessive, and a lighter schedule could solve the issue for players and fans. With a shorter season, every game would have a greater impact on the standings, which would make for much more entertaining and competitive basketball throughout the season, which is what the NBA is trying to accomplish right now. The model would replicate the NFL in some regard, who draws greater TV ratings than the NBA in the regular season. However, shortening the season would amount to less ticket sales and less TV views on a per-season basis, so the league might prefer not to go that route. It'll be interesting to see how these new rules change the way teams are coached and managed, and what rules follow as the NBA looks to deliver a better product for their fans.